Patti has been doing amazing things with the London Common Front. She's done all kinds of grassroots work with Londoners for door to door, and she's the president of her Labour Council as well in London.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much again to Mike Pelichuk for organizing this forum, and to the two previous speakers. And I'll be talking about union community coalitions. And I'd just like to point out, actually, Mike, I'm going to kind of break your rule a little bit. I don't think you'll mind, because there are a lot of Labour Council comrades in the room, and we achieved a historic win. And we've been working on this for over 5 years. And some of the people in the room were lead on this. So what we achieved was that Labour councils, which are at the grassroots level, will now have representation on the Canadian Labour Congress, Canadian Council. So we'll have 4 positions. Those represent regions across Canada. And so one thing, and I've been having conversations with people all week about how we build movement, how we build national capacity, because it's actually pretty complex, right? But in terms of one mechanism that we now have, we have Labour councils at the grassroots level all across the country. We have a mandate to do outreach, to work with, to build union community coalitions. And so we actually now have a mechanism that we can use for many issues, and I'm sure that many people in the room are working on issues that are important to them. So just to say that that was a major victory. That took a lot of, as I said, years and years of organizing. But that's one sort of infrastructure that we have now. And we're facing, and the previous speakers have talked about the immense challenges facing us right now. So we have had years of austerity, and so we're fighting to retain social and labor gains that were fought for over decades. We have, of course, the climate change crisis, and now we have what I call the rise of the right. And so we see, for example, in Ontario, at the Peel Board of Education, about 100 neo-Nazi activists showing up, propagating hate, which was shocking to me. And a lot of Canadians, I don't think, probably people in the room are aware of what's going on and how serious it is, but I don't think a lot of Canadians are aware of this. And so we've got a lot of different layers as activists, a lot of different challenges. Mike asked me primarily to speak about our London Saving Door-to-Door campaign, and which was a phenomenal campaign. And so just to say that our London and District Labour Council for many years integrates community activists into all aspects of our Labour Council. And so we already had, I think, a pretty effective activist infrastructure, and we have many experienced veteran activists in different community groups. Like the London Common Front, which includes some initially Occupy activists, Council of Canadians, and other community folks who come to and are invited to all of our meetings and are very integral to how our Labour Council works. So when we hit the ground running on the Saving Door-to-Door campaign, we had that infrastructure, and I think it was Suzanne who talked about the need for trust. So how do we build effective coalitions? There has to be trust. That's built over a period of time. And we were in the middle of, at that point, the onslaught of the Conservative government. And so for a lot of us, the Saving Door-to-Door campaign was symbolic of course, fighting for public service that is cherished from coast to coast and other public services. But we were fighting against, again, that far-right government, the attack on democracy. And so the campaign in London definitely, for us, was part of that whole fight back. And of course, we did get rid of the Harper government. And I believe that the Saving Door-to-Door campaign was one very concrete way in which we were able to do that. So, I mean, what were the components of the campaign? As I said, we had experienced Unity community activists. We already had an existing infrastructure, but I'd like to give Mike Pelichek and CUPW credit, because I think that you have the vision, and you have a very progressive leader and leaders, and I think that that's a really important component. So what we were able to do was, of course, with our moving on the ground, a lot of the standard things that activists do, such as lobbying. We did start going door to door in a very intensive way. So, and that takes commitment. So we went door to door every single weekend. We switched off. We do 2 Saturdays, 2 Sundays. The canvases were fairly short. We took the time to talk to people, really talk to people at the doorstep. And from there, we had a lot of momentum fairly quickly. Also, again, getting back to the leadership at CPW, we had access to many different stories, articles, and also actions that were happening from across the country. So we had the full resources of the union. Communications support, fact support, and so on, media support. But what we found when we were going door to door was that people quickly started to hear what we were doing. And those of you who've done door-to-door work, sometimes it's pretty tough at the door, especially if you're just meeting somebody cold. But after not too long, I'd say less than a month, sometimes we couldn't even get one statement out of our mouths, and the person would say, yes, I want my door-to-door mail delivery, and yes, I'm doing that, and what can I do? Where do I sign? What can I do? How can I mobilize? And so the campaign really gained momentum quite quickly. Then, as you probably know, the Conservatives engaged in what I call the scorched earth policy. So they knew that people were really opposed to the CNBs, I call them tin boxes, and that people were really angry. And so the summer before the election, they tried to smack in as many CNBs as quickly as they could. So in London, we decided to take some more militant action. And so on various, what were to be various CNB sites, and our community activists were really key here. We had a local artist who designed garden boxes, and so we would put the garden box and put in a lovely garden instead of a CNB on those concrete pads. And it was the first time in my life, too, that we did actual street level action on our street, and I have to give my partner here, Stuart Wise, credit as well. So literally, when they dug up the site on our street, I went to our neighbor and said, this is what's going on. They want to put a CNB in. How do you feel about that? She was extremely upset. I said, we would like to, with your permission, put in a protest site there and have people stay in the protest site so that the concrete pad doesn't go in. And she said, yes, 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 yes. And so that was phenomenal, and actually built a lot of community on our street. We had activists, CPW members, people in the neighborhood came to the site. We had meetings on the site. I had warned our neighbor Zola that we would have a lot of media showing up, which we did. I put out a media release about a 24-hour protest party. But I think one of the things I'm getting at here that's important in terms of keeping people in, keeping people excited, and building coalition are creative types of actions, right? As you know, these kinds of actions too took place in many other cities across the country. And then again, I give credit to Mike, because I don't know of any other union leader who would get in an RV. And how many months were you on the road?
Too many.
No, really, seriously, how many months were you on the road?
3 or 4.
Yeah, and you went coast to coast a couple of times,
And
right?
back again.
Right, and if you heard his speech today, he targeted swing ridings, but there were a lot of actions that took place in all those cities where you and other CPW folks visited, and again, it was targeted at taking out the Conservative government, and as I said, we were obviously, all of us probably, highly successful in doing that. So, so I'm gonna wrap up. I could talk about many other campaigns. We've also been in London. We've also been very active on the 15 in Fairness campaign. How many people have done action on that campaign? Right, and so that's tremendously exciting. Another example of what can happen with strong union community coalitions. And I'd also like to just note Dylan Penner, who's in the room and has done an incredible job in terms of Friends of Public Services. Another brilliant example of strong community union coalition, and just wanted to make sure I referenced that. But I'll leave it there so that we can hear our last speaker and have some discussion.
Paul Finch, who's the Secretary-Treasurer of the BCGEU. So Paul's going to talk about the experience of the anti-Campbell movement back in 2004-ish and the general strikes that were organized through the Community Solidarity Coalition.
So my name is Paul Finch. I'm the Treasurer of the BC Government Service Employees Union. And I just want to thank all the other panelists here. It was great hearing from you, and I want to thank Mike Palachuk for organizing this. I think I've known Mike for a while. He's a good friend, and he's one of the smartest minds in labor I've met. And he's stayed true to his principles and done a lot of good work. And I want to thank all of you for coming and spending your Thursday night here. And Mike cut me off, or give me an idea if I go too long, because I don't want to take up too much time. So just jump in. So I just want to kind of start back and just explain a bit about the Community Solidarity Coalition that I was heavily involved with in the early 2000s in BC, and just kind of give a bit of context or kind of understanding with that from kind of the other side of the equation, which is now as the union treasurer. So the BCGU, the union that I'm in, we represent 72,000 members across the province. We have a lot of resources, and we annually spend quite a bit of money supporting what we call strategic partnerships with community groups. And this is a broad thing, but when I was, I think, a student, that's really, I kind of got involved in activism before I was a student, but that was my first kind of window into definitely what the relationship was in terms of community organizing. And so, it's interesting you mentioned the problem with kind of the rise of the far right and fascism here in Canada, and we're seeing it a lot in BC as well, and I think around Europe and around the world. One of the first actions I got involved with was an Antifa action in Victoria at the Nellie McClung public library, in Saanich at the time. And I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of people that would be in the Community Solidarities Coalition 5 years later were there. And so when I went to college, I went to community college. I couldn't really afford to go to university. And I went to community college, and I just kind of, moved out, did it. And I was pretty involved already in kind of the activist-y scene. I'd read a lot of Bakunin, and I thought this was a good idea. And obscure reference there. Actually what happened was the student union was trying to organize a protest, and they hadn't done this before, and so they said, can we hire you to organize it for us? Because they'd known I'd done a bunch of these, and they said, I said, okay, yeah, I'll do this. And it went really well. And they're like, well, can you do some more? And I said, no, your organization's poorly mismanaged. I'm going to quit my job. I'm working for the student union. I'm going to run to your executive, for finance executive, and then I'm going to run for the chairperson of the society. And I won. And so, and I shouldn't say I won, but we won. That's the slate that we kind of took over the student union. And what happened concurrently is a right-wing, very conservative government. They're called the BC Liberals, but actually they're very conservative. They come out of the Social Credit Party. Won election provincially in the early 2000s. And the catalyst moment that I'm going to get to and explain where the kind of apex of this Community Solidarities Coalition work happened was when this government, just to give you an idea of where they came from, they legislated a retroactive 15% decrease for the healthcare workers in the facilities healthcare sector. So they said, these workers were on strike, and they said, okay, we're going to legislate you back to work, we're going to rip up your contract, and you actually owe money for the last 3 months because we're cutting your wages. So it's not a retroactive wage increase, it's a retroactive wage decrease. So, but backing it up, before that happened, everyone kind of knew this was going to be a bad scene. And I'm going to leave some stuff out because I really want to be as short as possible and kind of get to the dialogue. But the unions at the time had the prescience to start what was called the Community Solidarities Coalition. And I'm going to be frank about this. They came in, they basically engaged a whole bunch of community groups, and they had a point person kind of go out who was assigned full time to this, and they said, we're going to give you a bunch of resources so you guys can meet together and come together and talk with each other. And we just want opposition. We just want to coordinate or help coordinate opposition to the things this government is doing that's hurting working people and whatever. And so it was really a combination of community groups, labor, and student groups. But the labor groups were actually, it's interesting, labor was involved in a way that is very similar to a labor council because it was a social club of grassroots labor organizers and staff reps and rank and file shop stewards and student union people, and so we were all in this coalition. And we did some protest actions, we got to know each other, we did some other stuff. And what happened was when the health facility sector went on strike, and these are fairly precarious workers in the sense that they often shift jobs, but also in the sense that they're not very well paid. And so the government basically looked at this union that represented the majority of these workers. They weren't the only union there, the hospital employees union. And they basically said, we're going to go after you because we think you're the weak link. We think we can crush you. And we're going to make an example of you to the rest of the labor movement. And when they went after the HEU, the response from rank and file workers was tremendous. There was rage, there was anger, there was people said, we want a wildcat out, let's shut this province down, we're done, we're not going to, because they saw the writing on the wall, they saw this was a test. And so this Community Solidarities Coalition, that we'd done a few actions together, we'd held some big protests. For example, they opened up the legislature and we held a protest that shut down the whole thing. They couldn't have the gun salute, they couldn't have the parade. The Premier and the Lieutenant General had to sneak in through the underground parking lot to the legislature. There was no, so this was a big deal, right? We pulled off these very large, very successful actions. And what had happened is that when this occurred, the kind of rank and file of a lot of these local unions in the city I was in Victoria looked to us as a group for leadership on what to do, right? So we said, well, you know what to do, let's pull a general strike. And so we basically got together and we said, okay, everyone wants this. Like a lot of the people, they're screaming for it. But there was a lot of real concern, I think, in the labor centrals at the time, and the labor centrals, the BC Federation of Labor, a lot of the unions didn't want to support it, and so, but their locals did. And so, having the advantage at the time of not being a major union treasurer, so I was like, yeah, let's do this. So what we did is kind of our task. We designed and printed the general strike posters and the leaflets that we thousands. I think about 1,000 posters and hundreds. I'd say about 5,000 leaflets around there. Hard to say how many got distributed because we did it all through our student union print shop. And I think the interesting part was it wasn't that we were. It was interesting. It was fallow ground. It wasn't that we were generating the support. We weren't doing the hard door-to-door work of kind of going around and trying to win people over. It was that we had this pre-existing solidarity coalition, and a moment occurred, and it was a moment of opportunity. And the moment of opportunity was that the government did something really, really bad that everyone hated, that brought everyone together, where they said, we need to do something about this. And there was a vacuum of leadership. And so in that vacuum of leadership, we stepped in and we said, okay, like we're hearing you. We know what you want to do. Let's do it. And we're going to give some structure to it. And so when we started pushing for that, and we can't take credit for it because I think there's union locals in particular that wildcatted first, more than anything, I think, showed a lot of that leadership. There's Trevor's in the audience here. I think he was one of those locals. But so what happened is that when momentum started to build, it was infectious because there was this excitement that built around it. And the excitement was, so all our organizing work, our leafleting, postering, our kind of holding meetings, everything was oriented around an existing kind of momentum or enthusiasm that was just infectious. And so what happened is we called this general strike for shortly after May 1st rather. And I think it was May 4th or May 5th or somewhere around there. And so the May Day rally was electric. Usually May Day is kind of like you get this, a baker's dozen of kind of like 1970s left groups that come together, and they've got these really kind of antique flags, and there's some speeches, and it's more kind of like a bunch of people who are into the same kind of eclectic libraries kind of get together and kind of share their stories. But there was like hundreds and hundreds of people there, and the high schools had organized strike committees, and they'd gone off on strike. And there was this one syndicalist rap performance. It was brilliant at the time. But what they did, what happened? This May Day was electric, and everyone kind of realized then, okay, this thing's going to kick off. So the Federation of Labor came in and said, okay, general strike's going to happen. We're endorsing it, all out. Let's do it. And we were all kind of a bit skeptical. And I don't want to get into the internal labor politics, and I've since learned more about it since I'm friends with a lot of the people that were involved in doing this at the time. But what happened is at the 11th hour of the strike, so it was set to go off this day, and so like basically 11 p.m. And we were all in meeting watching the TV in the main room of the BCGU area office in Victoria, where I now work sometimes. And so the union still up to this point, we had a union resources like lending us the space so we could meet for free here to organize these activities. And we're watching this, and then the president of the BC Fed at the time comes on and says, okay, we've reached a deal with the government. Okay, it's over, general strike's off, everyone go to work tomorrow. And so we're all thinking, oh, what's the deal? And of course the deal was, well, you're going to keep the wage decrease. It's going to apply to more people than it did before. But don't worry, you get to work an extra 2.5 hours a week. You move from a 35 to 37.5 hour work week, and you're all good. Right? So, you'll make up the wages. So it's the same, so we said, no way. Like, that's so it was this calling war. And I'd say in this about 4 hours, we had the foresight to set up flying squads. And so there was this calling war that started to occur because the labor unions involved in the Fed, some of them enthusiastically, some of them not so enthusiastically, and some of them not at all, called up their members and said, okay, general strike's off, go back to work. And don't walk off tomorrow. But we were calling everyone too, and we were saying, it's still on. Don't listen to these people if you get this call. They're lying to you, and go out. But also, so the other thing we'd done is because we'd formed flying squads and we'd used them in protest before, is that we had a domino theory. And so we basically got, in BC there's this thing, it's kind of like Quebec, and I've had only a little bit of kind of experience with Quebec. I think I was in the anti-FTA protest in Quebec City in 2001. I skipped high school for 2 weeks, drove across the country. It was a riot. But we literally, but it was, but you know, and that was also the time when LASSE was formed, which is the Radical Student Federation. And so all those people that formed that were part of that anti-globalization movement with us, and were part of that core nucleus of syndicalists that got together. And so it was interesting because, you know, I'd say the way we were able to mobilize quickly was because we had these people that were directly connected and plugged into each labor union local that were in this Solidarity Coalition. We didn't have a formal structure, unfortunately. I'll explain a bit why that was a bad thing. But we basically, to put in context, we'd set these phone networks where you call up and say, okay, the domino effect was this. The first kind of place to go out was really, it was a hospital picket line, the Royal Jubilee Hospital picket line. And the night of, the workers there took their union placards, because their own union said, okay, go back to work. They took the placards and they took our general strike poster. I was pretty proud of this because I'd made the poster, and it was like punk style, right? I'd actually basically glue pasted it on. I cut parts I cut out, and I'd photocopied that, and I did a mass photocopy off the student union printer. But they pasted them onto their strike placards over top of their union logos. And they formed a semicircle so that, you know, Global News was doing this video, and they're like, we're still out, screw this. And so when we saw that, we said, okay, we got to pull this off. And so the next early location, one of them was the JGM maintenance yard in Victoria. And what we did is we basically had our flying squad. Some union locals just went out anyway, but the ones, we had our flying squad show up, and they just set up a picket line. And in BC, like I was getting to in Quebec, a picket line is a picket line. No one crosses. You can send somebody, like one person with a sign that just says, this is a picket line in front of a yard, and it's down tools, everyone stays outside. There is a Pavlovian conditioning to a picket line in BC. And so we don't even tolerate information lines. Those don't exist in BC, because it's actually, we find it a way, it's actually conditioning people to think it's okay to cross a picket line, right? That's why we don't have them. And so that's why these were effective. So these flying squads cross-picketed all these sites, but the ones early in the morning, as soon as we cross-picketed off the workers there, we said, look, this is going to fail unless you go to this other site, and we're going to redirect you to go and cross-picket these other people off who don't start work for another couple hours. And so there was a domino effect that occurred in that cross-picketing. And what we found was, I'm not sure how effective it was, because it seemed effective at the beginning, but by the end of the day, we had like the Safeway workers walked off the job. No one picked them off. They just walked. They're like, everyone's out. We're out too. And so, you know, and that was the UFCW 1518. And so, you know, and of course it fell apart within a couple days, and there was a whole drama around it. But the two lessons I want to get at this, because I'm probably nearing the end of my time, is this. One was, this was incredibly effective, but it was effective because we had a moment where there was popular interest. There was something we could unite around, and we really rode that popular interest. We didn't build it up, we just kind of took advantage of it. Two was, we were really effective because we were small, but we had an informal group. But later on, when the group tried to meet at a larger scale and didn't adopt a formal structure, there was no formal accountability, and that lack of formal accountability doomed it. It just fell apart, right? And at that time, I'd gotten together a group of left-wing student unions we were basically trying to form our own left-wing Anglophone student union. It didn't work, but we basically split off and created our own thing. And we backed this thing, and it actually hurt us because, ended up hurting us because this assembly that was created was so disorganized. There was no rules of order, there was no structure, there was no accountability. Everyone just got really jaded and just backed out. And finally, that unions had a tremendous role to play, because the resources that the labor movement has are tremendously important and effective. And too often, strategic partnerships between labor and community groups looks like writing a check and saying, look, we can tell our members that we're supporting you because we wrote you a check. And that is not solidarity. So I just want to say I had good fortune to I become friends with a few members of the Chicago Teachers Union. I happened to be in Chicago during when they did a one-day strike. If you were at the rally then, what you saw was is that they put front and center community groups, whether it was Black Lives Matter, it was the student unions, whatever. They put them front and center in their rally. They had thousands and thousands of people. It was an amazing experience, and it was very effective. And if you haven't seen what they're doing there, you should check it out. Our union, the GU, we actually brought in a member of the Chicago Teachers Union quite recently to speak about their community organizing there. So anyway, thanks again for the panel. Sorry if I went over time. I wanted to try and get that all out, and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.